Good evening. I'm Jim Gierach, and welcome to the 12th edition of Chicago's War on Drugs. Today is Tuesday, June 20th, 2017, and it's my honor and privilege to have with me as guest today Ray Lopez, Alderman of the 15th Ward. Each Tuesday when we come in here, we always come off another weekend, and the only question is it going to be 2 dozen or 3 dozen or 4 dozen people that were shot, and how many died. And we, of course, have had a past weekend here. I believe this article is from the Chicago Sun-Times on May the 9th, and there had just been some ping-pong violence back and forth where there's retaliatory shooting. And things were so bad, the Chicago Sun-Times, as the screen shows, was calling the 15th Ward a ward at war. And it's just really an exemplification of the problems that come with the war on drugs, not just in the African American communities, but the Hispanic communities and really all communities. So, what's your take on this war on drugs and its effect on your community?
Well, I think that, Jim, as that headline put it so succinctly, many of our neighborhoods are at war. We look at the violence that we see every week in our city. I think we had 30 people shot. I think we just hit the 300th homicide in our city this past weekend. And we have to look at what's the underlying factor in all of the violence that we see. You know, we know in many of our communities it's, breakdown of the family, it's the lack of opportunity, it's the economic drivers that, that coincide with the generational allure of gang violence. But oftentimes, beneath all of that is the drug economy that exists in all of our communities and the insatiable need to have dominance locally by a number of these gangs and affiliates that are willing to, at least in my area, resort to shooting people with AK-47s and for decades, for having continual and sustained retaliatory gun violence fueled by the need to have drug sale superiority in their respective neighborhoods. And I think that goes to the question of, are our policies actually doing what they meant to do, which is to protect people, or are we actually putting them in greater harm's way?
Yeah, the intention certainly of the war on drugs was try to help people, to protect neighborhoods, and to prevent people from overdosing and kids starting to use drugs. And we put DARE in the schools, and of course the years went by and we learned that the kids who go through DARE have a higher rate of drug use than those who don't go through DARE. And we basically learned that drug policy works in reverse. The harder you try to suppress drug use, the more it flourishes. You increase the penalties on methamphetamine to make it the same as heroin, and now methamphetamine is available in many places as heroin. We seize a ton of drugs and we think, oh, we saved the kids from these drugs. Well, the drug cartels want us to destroy the ton of drugs once law enforcement gets it, because it now gives the people the only access to go back to the cartels to get the drugs. So where these drugs could be used in competition as part of a drug treatment program, instead, no, we destroy it. Then we put anti-drug advertising on TV, and whether you say use drugs or you say don't use drugs, it's a drug ad. So that's the reason I think it's difficult to go to the public sometimes and say, we need a change in drug policy to make things better, and it's counterintuitive.
Well, I think definitely any time that we try to deviate from a program that we've had for decades now, it's 40, 50 years, if not more, of having the same kind of just say no policy without looking at the impact it's had is very short-sighted. For many of us, it's easy to say that we're going to attack a negative in our communities. But if our efforts don't work, we have to reevaluate, do the course correction, and see how we can tweak what we put out to try and be better. No program I know has ever worked where you just throw it out there once and let it go for 5 decades without changing it and have any kind of plausible and acceptable benefits.
Yeah.
As you said, many of these programs have worked in reverse. I will tell you my own experience. I grew up at a time when Joe Camel was still around. I grew up with the gum cigarettes. And then I remember being told, smoking's bad for you, stay away from cigarettes. And yet somehow I managed to get a hold of my first pack of cigarettes when I was 16 years old. I mean, the same logic applies in this case.
I had a camp counselor buy my first pack of cigarettes for me. He was a Chicago school teacher, and I think I was
Shall
about
remain anonymous.
I was about 14. Yes, and he was a good guy. He would give us his first name in a bounce. He put us over his shoulder. He was a great person, but he probably shouldn't have done that. I see we have a call. Before I go to the caller, I want to do a quick commercial announcement. We're here because there's an Azteca Baseball League at the website and phone number shown where people are staying out of trouble playing baseball and hopefully having a winning season, and I thank them for the opportunity for having these 13 shows. Now, let's hear from our caller.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Just like to make a couple of comments. One of them is that the war on drugs was started by Richard Milhouse Nixon, and it was directed primarily against people that his party perceived as Democrats, Republicans, people against Republicans, and that would be people in minority communities and that sort of thing. And that's where the war on drugs started. The other thing I'd like to point out is the current war on drugs is remarkably successful, which is to say that there's a lot of law enforcement that has, mighty fine jobs and houses as a result of, doing a round robin of incarcerating people who they know are just going to continue to do what they do because there are no other opportunities in a lot of these communities. The third thing I'd like to ask is that if you wiped out the economics of drugs tomorrow, what are all the people in the communities where that money is being generated going to do after that? I mean, tomorrow it just magically disappeared.
Okay, you're only permitted to ask one really hard question. Thank you, caller. Let's find out what the alderman has to say about that.
Well, it was one question with 3 parts, so I give him credit
Go
for
ahead.
that. So I think without a doubt, we all know that a lot of the reasons behind President Nixon's war on drugs wasn't to, in fact, start disenfranchising minority communities, particularly African Americans. And we've seen that result for decades. The fact that a majority of the individuals, even in our own state, who are behind bars are either Latino or African American is testament to that fact. And the fact that a lot of them get arrested and sent away for what are minor drug offenses, where that's not always the case in other communities, is testament to that fact. Even right now, when we've seen the crack epidemic sweep through the African American community, it was hailed as a drug epidemic, a crime epidemic. But as we see heroin start reaching into the suburbs, the western suburbs, DuPage County and others that are not necessarily minority communities, now it's a health issue. And now we're going to treat it differently. We're going to offer cures that cost $51,000 a person to cure people of their health issue known as heroin, when we did nothing to cure African Americans of their crack issue.
Yeah.
Truly racism in the system. So I think we have to understand that and also use that as grounds for moving forward. But I want to answer the other question. Forgive me, I forgot what the middle question was. But I think the question about what happens if you were to snap your fingers and have all the drugs disappear, the economic drivers. Many people do not resort to selling drugs simply because of the allure of being able to put drug dealer on a business card. They do it because they generally have no other opportunities in the neighborhoods that they live in. They have families, they may have children, they have their own needs, they have hunger. And they will resort to anything that they have to do in order to fill and meet those needs. Selling drugs is the easiest way for many people in communities with lack of opportunity to cessate those needs. If you were to magically snap your fingers and all the cocaine and all the heroin and all the crack and every other drug imaginable magically disappeared, something else would fill the void. And that is why that has always been one of the topics of discussion, at least at the city council, is that we have to be willing to step up and provide economic alternatives for individuals who are seriously wanting to separate themselves from drug sales and from that kind of lifestyle. Because if we don't, we're setting not only them up for failure, but ourselves up for failure. To simply say don't sell drugs because we don't think it's right and give you no plausible alternative in terms of providing for yourself, your family, and others, it's just a fallacy to think that would work.
Now, the question then becomes, of course, well, how do we pay for that? And one of the things taxpayers in Cook County and Illinois should realize, and Chicago, of course, is that you can't put 10,000 people in the Cook County jail and expect not to be squandering a good part of your revenue source. You can't have bullet hole health care in the city of Chicago, which is estimated to be $2.5 billion a year. No health care system, Trump care, Obamacare, or any other care, can pay that bill. So if we eliminate much of this violence, this gunshot violence, with over 4,000 people shot in Chicago last year, with 780 people killed, with you mentioned the 300th homicide in the city of Chicago happening on Father's Day this year, just as it did last year. And yet, where are our leaders calling for drug policy reform to stop the violence? Well, I believe I have one here today, and I do appreciate that. And we've had Tony Preckwinkle, and we had Jesus Garcia, we had Rod Sawyer, who are talking about the need for drug policy reform. The problem is we don't have federal representatives, we don't have our senators, we don't have our governor, we don't have the mayor that is yet calling for drug policy reform to stop the violence in Chicago. I don't want to be political.
Oh, no politics in that statement whatsoever. But I think you raise a very good point. And I think the point is that if we were truly trying to affect some sort of change, there's a price tag for change. And I don't think it's a secret to you, and I'm sure it's not a secret to your viewers, is that, promoting law enforcement, promoting more jails, promoting a lot of those political type items do have a positive net factor when it comes to politics and re-election. Oftentimes, saying that you're going to help people get off drugs, saying you're going to help provide opportunities for poor people who otherwise would not have any, saying that you're going to tackle, for example, the unemployment rate of the African American male 18 to 24, which is as high as 70%, saying that you're going to invest in them with real job opportunities so that they don't have to resort to lives of crime and gun and gang and drug sales, is not something that we consider politically sexy. It's not something that we automatically assume is going to engender and elicit a positive response from the electorate. We like to hear those catchphrases, we're tough on crime, we're tough on criminals, but at the end of the day, we could spend all the money that we have trying to bolster our defenses, or we can actually start diverting some of those monies to actually preventing people from getting caught up in this circular game that we play in our neighborhoods.
One story that drove home the economics to me, I ran for state's attorney in Cook County in 1992 on the idea of drug policy reform, and I had been in Englewood, and West Englewood, I think, is part of your 15th ward. And I had seen a minister, and I'm through with the minister, and so I'm walking across the school playground next to this church, and I'm by myself. It's daylight, a beautiful day, and here comes two guys walking the other direction, African Americans. One guy had a big gold necklace around him with a dollar sign, and the other guy had the same matching gold thing, only his had a gun hanging from it. So I'm out there by myself. I go walking up, and I reach it. I'm Jim Gierach, running for state's attorney, and I want to take the profit out of drugs to stop the crime. And these two guys look at me like I should have my head examined. I was obviously harmless, and so the one guy says to me, well, what are we going to do to make a living? And I said, well, you got to do something other than that, or we're going to have too many people hurt and killed. But it really drove the point home to me. I mean, here's a guy who legitimately was asking, well, what are we going to do to make a living? And who's going to answer that question?
You know, not a day goes by in my office where people come to me asking for help for how am I able to provide for my family? How am I able to set a new course and go straight with my life? And a lot of the things that we take for granted, you and I, don't exist for many of these individuals. Things that are as simple as an ID, which you need in order to apply for a job. There are barriers even for them. And oftentimes, if we don't address the little issues early, whether it's finding stable housing, because many of them may be doubled up and technically homeless, they may have no IDs, they may not know how to expunge their records so that they don't have to answer the box question,
Right.
so that they can actually get a job that actually is beneficial. You know, if we don't start helping people with those issues, the street will always help them, and the streets will find a way.
Well, let's take another caller.
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen. I won't stay on the line too long, but I did want to get this off my chest. First of all, when I was growing up, the number one thing so many people told their children was, the world doesn't owe you a living. In other words, you shouldn't even be concerned with those people who sell that poison to ask, oh, how are we going to earn a living? You don't feel sorry for them. And also, I'm sorry, but you have to ask, where do these drugs come from? And when you have the sanctuary city policy and they think they can get away with it, those cartels are going to move that poison into Chicago. And shame on all the politicians, the spineless politicians who just sit back and always feel sorry for these people. I've stayed away from drugs my whole life. I took jobs that other people wouldn't take so I could show my face in public and be an upright citizen. And you can't feel sorry for people like that. My God, they'll take advantage of you, and you're going to curse the future generations and thinking that you have to expend all this money to bail people out of problems that they've created for yourself. Grow a set of stones and dig in and start punishing these people, catching these people, and that BS sanctuary city stuff, and stop those drugs from flowing into Chicago and Cook County to begin with. I wish you well, but you got to do something.
All right,
Good night.
caller, thank you very much for the call.
Well, you know, that's the first time in probably 2 months someone's told me I need to grow a set of stones. I think that I'm usually the one that everyone says has demonstrated that I have a set. So thank you. But you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong in thinking that sanctuary city status is what brought drugs to this city. Last time I've checked, drugs have been a part of this city for quite a long time. And I think that, yes, a lot of us grew up in families with structure, that we had the nurturing upbringing to go out, be industrious, and get that job to do whatever you had to do. I'll tell you, my first job growing up, my family was very supportive and demanding of me with expectations. My first job growing up was shoveling horse manure at the age of 14. Nothing glamorous, nothing owed, and I got it myself because I actually wanted to ride horses. But we can't assume that everyone starts from the same starting point as you and I did. We are dealing with communities where the family breakdown is so great, where you have grandchildren being raised by their grandparents because mom or dad or both are not even in the picture. So it's not easy to just say, well, you know, these families or these children don't help them because they should know how to do it on their own. You had to be taught as a caller and as myself to be industrious, to have the standard, to go out and do something. That was something that was ingrained in you through your family that was adjusted and supportive of that. In the absence of that, we do have to help these individuals who don't necessarily have that familiarly taught wherewithal to move forward. Because if we simply say, well, let them figure it out, feed them to the wolves and let them sink or swim, right now we're swimming in the pool that they're swimming in too. And as we watch them sink, they're going to take each and every one of us with them if we choose not to help them. And it is better, more cost-effective, and morally right to help the individuals who are not as fortunate and don't have the same kind of luxuries we had in order to get them to rise up as well. Otherwise, shows like this and others that talk about the violence, the drugs, and the gangs will continue because we have not have addressed anything simply from looking at it from a point of privilege.
And I would note there's a difference between feeling sorry for someone and understanding what their circumstances are. When they let 30,000 people out of the Illinois penitentiary system in 2014, with every single one of them branded a convicted felon, many of them for nonviolent drug offenses, and we expect that person to now perform and go get a job, they can't get a job even if they got a college education while they were incarcerated. And then this caller asks, well, where do these drugs come from? The drugs come from all over. Drugs have been here from the beginning of time. Illinois and the United States and Mexico have ditchweed, and it's only ditchweed. Nobody cares about it until somebody decides they're going to collect votes by selling snake oil, and now a ton of this ditchweed is now worth over $1 million or multi-million dollars. When Mexico is producing 21,500 metric tons of marijuana per year. It is our laws which have invited drugs to come into America and to inundate us. It is us that are importing, not particular African Americans or Hispanics or Asians or Muslims. It's we, the American people, who invited, through the war on drugs from everywhere, because the United States is the place with money, and we can pay for them and afford them.
You go where the buyers are.
That's exactly what's happened, and the war on drugs is criminogenic, it's drugogenic, and it's corruptogenic. It does all of those things exactly the opposite of really what we've tried to do with our society here in America.
Now, and I think that, as we move forward and continue to talk on this dialogue, I think we have to just be willing to step back and look at, from a point of truth, what have our laws accomplished? What are the effects that they've had in our communities? What are the true effects that we want, and how are we willing to get there? And if that requires us to do some tweaking or some complete overhaul, so be it, because unless we start from a point of truth and look for what means we need to get to that desired end, nothing is ever going to change.
There's so much discussion now about opioids and heroin, and here, this is a Sun-Times story from 2004. That's 13 years ago, where we were already number 2 in the nation in heroin overdoses. We now have a combination of prescription opioid overdose, which is just another factor or function of legal opiates. There's an opiate epidemic that's going on. Here's an article that just came out about a study. In just 1 year, nearly 1.3 million Americans needed hospital care because of opiates. Those opiates are prohibited heroin and legal prescription drugs, both having exorbitant prices which drive people to the business, whether you're a physician or a drug peddler.
Yeah, and we see the abuse of those opioids time and time again, to the point now where I think even in some other countries, they are now allowing people with opioid addictions to actually go and self-medicate, so to speak, at least in the presence of doctors in a facility, to ensure if you are going to be a heroin user, that you could do it in an environment where you won't OD.
They're safe injection facilities,
Yes.
so that nobody needs to die because of their addiction. And in some case, when other treatment as a last resort doesn't work, then they're even prescribing the heroin rather than just what's the name of the drug? The substitute for heroin.
I know which one you're talking about. I forget, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Obviously, some of those countries are more forward leftist thinking than we are, but at least they show the ability to start looking at it from a whole different approach.
Yeah, methadone is what I was trying to
That's
think
it.
of.
What he said.
What he said. Well, I want to just say I appreciate so much that the alderman has come in, and so do the people of Chicago, because we need fresh views, a fresh voice, and we need to instill some hope in the people of Chicago who are suffering from the god-awful war on drugs. I'm Jim Gierach, and I thank you for being with us. Join us next week for our 13th and final show. Thank you so much.